Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a book that's been massive globally, Elif Shafak's The 40 Rules of Love. For a lot of people, it's their way into Sufism, into Maulana Rumi and Shams Tabrizi.
It's beautifully written in many ways and incredibly popular.
Yeah.
Which actually makes what we're doing today feel quite important. We aren't reviewing the novel per se.
Right.
We're diving into a very specific and, let's say, highly critical source. An audio review by Dr. Naeem Mushtaq. And his review really questions the book's whole spiritual reputation.
Okay, so our mission here is to pull out the main arguments from that review, focusing on what historical accuracy, how spirituality is shown, and maybe the ethics of using these, well, deeply revered figures.
Exactly.
Because the novel, it starts with this feeling of real devotion, doesn't it? Like every chapter starts with the letter B, the Ba, Bismillah. That sets a tone immediately.
It really does. It kind of signals this sacred Islamic context right off the bat. You're led to expect profound spiritual insights.
Yeah, you think you're getting the real deal, spiritually speaking.
Precisely. It builds this powerful veneer of authenticity.
Yeah.
But Dr. Mushtaq, a core question is this genuine spiritual writing? Or is it what he calls chaska literature, basically sensationalism, just wrapped up in an Islamic covering to sell better?
Wow, okay. Chaska literature, that's quite a term. Let's unpack that. Where does he start? Maybe with the rules themselves, the 40 rules.
That's exactly where he starts. And perhaps the biggest shock for readers who aren't deep into Rumi's actual historical work is right there.
Okay.
The fundamental historical point Dr. Mushtaq makes is simple. Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi never wrote the 40 Rules of Love.
Wait, hold on. So the list, the whole framework of the book, that's not from Rumi?
Not as a distinct list authored by him, no. According to the reviewer, these rules are Elif Shafak's own conclusions, her interpretations drawn from reading Rumi's work like the Masnavi.
Oh.
They're presented in italics, right?
Huh.
Which makes it really easy for readers to assume they're, ancient original rules directly from the master.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Dr. Mushtaq points out they're the author's intellectual output, and crucially, they lack specific references. There's no Rumi said this in verse X of the Masnavi.
Okay, that distinction alone really shifts things for anyone who thought they were reading Rumi's literal words. I had no idea it was that clear-cut in the critique.
And it doesn't stop there. The misattribution, or perhaps unverified attribution, continues right at the start. The novel opens with this very striking quote, supposedly from Shams Tabrizi.
I remember that one, about seeing God and angels since childhood.
That's the one. Dr. Mushtaq states he actually searched for this quote in authenticated historical sources.
Like where? Rumi's own writings about Shams or...
Yeah, things like Rumi's Divani Shams or the biographical accounts from people like Sipah Salar who knew Rumi for decades. And well, he couldn't find it. The novel doesn't source it, and it seems absent from those key historical records.
So the foundational rules in the opening quote are potentially not historically solid.
According to this specific review, yes. It immediately makes you question the historical faithfulness of everything else, doesn't it?
It does. Okay, let's move on to another point from the review, this idea of narrative ethics. It sounds like the criticism isn't just about inventing things, but also about downplaying Rumi's actual teachings. How does that work in the novel?
This is a more subtle point Dr. Mushtaq raises. It's about how the novel handles genuine wisdom from Rumi. It takes real sayings, profound couplets from, say, the Masnavi,
Okay.
and puts them into the mouths of minor fictional characters, people who didn't actually exist or weren't known for that kind of depth.
Is there a specific example he gives?
Yes, he highlights a moment where a really profound insight, something definitely traceable back to the historical Masnavi, is spoken in the novel by Rumi's cook, the Baki.
So Rumi's wisdom comes from the fictional kitchen staff. But isn't that sort of thing like standard in historical fiction? Using wisdom to flesh out characters. Where does the reviewer say the line is crossed?
Well, the argument Dr. Mushtaq makes is that it becomes problematic when it seems systematic, when it feels like the reverence that should belong to Rumi is being transferred to the author's creations.
Ah, I see.
So when the cook delivers this deep insight, the reader might be impressed by the cook's wisdom, not necessarily recognizing it as Rumi's. It potentially diminishes Rumi's stature in the reader's mind and gives the glory, so to speak, to the fictional character.
Right, it kind of subtly shifts the admiration. Okay, that makes sense from a critical perspective. Let's pivot now. We need to talk about the part of the review that really leans into that sensationalism label, the fictional portrayal of the marriage between Shams and Kimia Khatun.
Yes, this is where Dr. Mushtaq argues the historical figures become Well, tools for a more dramatic, even sexualized narrative. Kimia Khatun, remember, was Rumi's adopted daughter, raised in his household, who married Shams.
And the novel creates a fictional storyline around their marital life.
A highly controversial one, according to the review.
Hmm.
It suggests there were issues, perhaps sexual attraction problems or dysfunction.
Okay. And how does the fictional Kimia deal with this?
This is a key point of criticism. Instead of seeking guidance from someone like Rumi's wife, who is effectively her stepmother, a figure of wisdom in the household the novel has Kimia go to. Well, a character described as a bizarre prostitute named Desert Rose.
Wait, really? Rumi's adopted daughter seeks marital advice from a fictional prostitute.
That's the narrative presented in the novel, and Dr. Mushtaq highlights it as completely inappropriate for the context.
Mm.
This character, Desert Rose, then apparently trains Kimia
Trains her? In what?
in techniques to sexually attract shams. The review mentions advice on body preparation, clothes, perfumes, and even teaching her a specific suggestive dance.
The dance.
Yes, a dance explicitly designed, according to the reviewer's description of the novel's content, to move different body parts in a way intended to incite sexual feelings in shams. This is detailed, apparently, in the chapter titled Kimia, dated Kanya, December 1247.
Wow. That's a world away from the spiritual tone set up elsewhere. It's hard to square those two things. And the review quotes an actual passage, doesn't it? To illustrate the explicitness.
It does. And just to be very clear for listeners, we're relaying the content Dr. Mushtaq highlights from the novel as evidence for his sensationalism claim. He points to a scene where Kimia tries to kiss Shams, using the explicit advice she supposedly received.
Okay.
The description apparently involves Kimia pushing her tongue into Shams's mouth and starting to, quote, flick it back and forth. This action is directly linked in the novel, according to the reviewer, to the prostitute's advice that, and this is quoting the source material cited in the review, men love to suck their wives' tongues.
Right. That level of graphic detail applied to figures known for spiritual purity. I can see why that fuels the sensationalism argument. And there was something about the translation, too.
Yes, a very telling point Dr. Mushtaq raises. He notes that when the novel was translated into Urdu by Jamhuri Publications, the translators apparently recognized how controversial this passage was.
What did they do?
They censored it. They omitted, or hazvakardia, those explicit details, particularly the description of the kiss. They removed that graphic element from the Urdu text.
If the translators felt they needed to cut that for their audience, that says a lot about how far the original content might be from the spiritual image it projects.
It really does. It underscores the ethical questions raised by the reviewer about using sacred history for what he sees as fictional sexual drama.
Okay, so let's contrast this. If the novel's plot is built on this fictional sexual tension and scandal, what do the actual historical sources say? What was the story of their marriage and Sham's eventual disappearance, according to texts closer to the time?
Right, so we look at sources like Risala-i Sipah Salar, written by someone who was with Rumi for 40 years, or Manaqibul Arifin. These are considered much more authentic accounts.
And what do they say about the marriage itself?
They present a completely different picture. They state that Shams Tabrizi himself asked Rumi for Kimia's hand in marriage. Rumi consented happily. The union was seen as one of high spiritual standing, characterized by purity. The word used is papisa.
So, reverence and purity, not sexual dysfunction, needing advice from, well, outside. What then did cause the conflict? Why did Shams leave?
The historical accounts center the conflict entirely elsewhere. It involved Rumi's second son, Aladdin.
Okay, how?
Shams and Kimia had their own dedicated living space, a chamber or tent. Aladdin apparently kept passing through their area frequently. Shams politely advised him to show a bit more decorum, more respect, basically, when walking through, given that his wife was present.
Just a reasonable request for privacy and respect.
Exactly. But Aladdin reportedly took great offense. There might have been some existing jealousy, too, as Shams seemed to favor Rumi's elder son, Sultan Walid. Aladdin's complaints then stirred up a group of people who started to harass Shams, showing him disrespect.
Ah, so it was external conflict fueled by envy and disrespect, not internal marital drama.
Precisely. The whole atmosphere turned sour because of this external pressure and lack of respect for Shams's station and privacy. It wasn't about anything happening between Shams and Kimia.
And that led to his disappearance.
Yes. Shams eventually told Sultan Walid something like, "These indignities will make me disappear without a trace." And shortly after, he did. The historical narrative is all about this external conflict and the spiritual sanctity of the couple, completely lacking the kind of sexualized plot the novel introduces.
Which really begs the question, why invent the sensational story when the real history has its own potent drama of envy and spiritual conflict?
And that leads right back to Dr. Mushtaq's main conclusion. He argues the why is simply for sensational appeal, for Chaska.
So let's wrap this up. What's the final verdict from Dr. Naeem Mushtaq's review? How does he ultimately classify the 40 rules of love?
He labels it Chaska literature sensational, maybe even a bit superficial or cheesy in its appeal, or even more bluntly, he calls it verbal sex, disguised in Islamic clothing. His point is that these revered historical figures, Rumi and Shams, become mere plot devices to deliver this sensationalized content to a mass audience.
That's incredibly harsh. He uses some strong analogies too,
He
right?
really doesn't hold back. He explicitly calls the novel, in his assessment, the Turkish version of 50 Shades of Grey. Or he compares it to putting the Kama Sutra or Kokshastra into novel form, but using the names and setting of Islamic history to frame it. He acknowledges the structure of the Bab Bismillah, occasional Quranic verses, but argues the core content is essentially eroticized drama, not genuine devotion.
So the argument boils down to using the scaffolding of religion, the names, the initial setup, to sell something quite different, something geared towards mass market sensation.
Exactly. And it forces you, the reader, to ask, if the rules aren't Rumi's, if key quotes are unverified, if the central relationship drama is a fiction that replaces historical purity with scandal, what exactly are you engaging with? What knowledge are you actually gaining?
That leaves us with a really challenging thought, doesn't it? When you encounter a narrative based on spiritual history, one that markets itself on spirituality, but according to this critique, at least relies heavily on sensationalism and an invented scandal. How do you judge the value of that? It really encourages you to perhaps go back to the original sources like the Risala-i Sipah Salar and see the historical complexity for yourself compared to the popularized version. A lot to think about there.